So it's been a long time since I've made one of these videos, and to be very, very frank about it, it's because it was something that I felt I was told to speak of, but at the same time I hadn't really come to understand the subject at hand. Like, I just felt like I needed to grow more into it and learn more about it. So you could say that this time was taken to really grow and learn as far as the ins and outs of this particular subject were involved. Anyway, so to jump right into it, because the truth of the matter is this video is I only get like 15 minutes to really discuss these kinds of things, so we'll just go for it. Anyway, the subject at hand is what's become known amongst church groups and churches in general as the sort of the Martha complex. Basically, it goes back to the story where Christ was talking to, or rather there was a preparation for a feast, and Christ was talking with Mary, and the whole time Martha was over preparing for the feast and getting ready, and she got frustrated with Mary for not helping her when Christ abruptly kind of rebuked her in simply stating that, Mary made the right choice and that she was staying with her Savior where Martha was off working for him, so to speak. And I'm putting a little bit more emphasis into it than I should be. But the basically the story involves a simple reality, and that is that in life we are given this choice of either spending our time with God or busying ourselves. And there's a persistent issue in the church where a lot of people opt to busy themselves a lot, and they don't spend a lot of time with God. I mean, if you want to think about it, to go right into some of the issue here, think hard about this. How much time do you devote to prayer? How much time do you devote to reading the Bible? And is it about achieving that amount of time? Is it about hitting that number dutifully? Or are you doing things because you desire to? See, the thing of it is that one thing that I've learned in kind of the process of this, and like personally I had a lot to learn relating to this because I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else would be. Maybe a little more so than some even. And that's that there's a lot of subtlety here, because obviously if we look at it in the perspective of if you'd rather be doing things for God instead of doing things with God, then you're wrong. Yeah, okay, obviously. You want to go out and feed the homeless, but you don't actually want to spend time praying. You don't want to spend any time actually with God, in His presence, just soaking in that. Well, there's a flaw there. You want to carry His name, but you don't want to know it. The issue is very, very apparent. But see, at the same time, on that level, yeah, it's very, very clear. But then you get down to the nitty-gritty kind of subtleties of it. And this is where I personally had to learn quite a bit, because I was guilty of it as much as anybody in this. And this was that, to go beyond that, there's also the point of validation, and where we find our validation. See, it's one thing to want to do things for God. It's another thing to want to do them for ourselves, but they glorify God. Almost as though it's the same way that, as a whole, as people, we justify ourselves and our existences by the things we do. And in that justification, we find our validation, and then it gives us value to do things. So take, for instance, that you have a good job. You're rewarded based on your performance at that job, correct? But does that make you a better person? You do a good job at your work. But are you therefore a good person? Well, most people would say, whether they believe it or not, on some base level, most people are going to say, yeah, that's what makes me feel good, makes me feel like a good person. And see, the thing of it is that a lot of the times when we talk about work and validation, we tend to look at it in the scope of people looking to achieve praise from those around them. And while that is true, and that is one aspect of this, there is the other aspect of it, and that is that the personal justification that we feel. Some people don't do their jobs for praise. I never did. I did my job to do the best that I could to help people. But in that same note, I was deriving my validation from that job, from that work. And in that, I was able to look at it and say, well, I did these things, therefore I'm a good person. I did good. Team me. And I could justify so many things. Even beyond this, people who are constantly fighting with other people, oftentimes they find their validation in being right or wrong. If they're right about the subject at hand, then they are justified and validated and all those things, and they have value as people. Because, see, the greater issue here, what the Martha complex as it is represents, truly, is a struggle in us, not only as humans but as Christians, to understand the value that we have. We want to prove it. But see, the funny thing is that with God, we already have it. See, the interesting thing is that we struggle with the idea of God loving us unconditionally because we constantly look for reasons to prove why we should be loved. We look for things to hold on to say, well, this is why I am what I am. This is what makes me this person. This is what makes me good. This is what makes me bad. But see, the reality is that with God, when He looks at us and sees that we are good or bad based on us. See, with Him, we don't prove our value. We have value intrinsically. It's something that's part of us. We exist. Therefore, we have meaning. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people want to, again, they just want to validate their claims or their person or whatever. There are a lot of different things that could be thrown into that mix, and the truth of the matter is a lot of them work. And it's really hard. It's really hard to get past that mentality. To be able to stop trying to prove your worth. Stop trying to make things right. And to simply live in the idea that you're okay. You have value. You have meaning. The God of heaven and earth looks at you and sees something worth loving. No matter who you are, where you've been, or what you've done, or any of those things. And there's no amount of work, or effort, or anything that you're going to do to change that. You can be the worst human being, and He still sees value in you. You can be the best human being, and He still sees the same value in you. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you're His or not. That's it. Now, a lot of people will say, well, there's an old justification for the whole Martha thing in churches, and that's that, being a Mary is the best, but without Martha, that would never happen. And it was actually a quote by Bill Johnson that I read in one of his books, where he stated how untrue that is. Jesus didn't ask for Martha. In fact, when Martha was doing all of her work, Jesus didn't congratulate her for the work she did. She was rebuked for demanding that Mary remove herself from His side to come work with her. See, one of the other really hard things about the whole Martha thing is that there's an element of control that we have, and that in of itself is one of the great struggles. Yeah, the control is in order to attain our own validation, because if we can control the validation we have, then we can control how we feel. When the reality is that what we're called into is a place of vulnerability, where we're able to be vulnerable with God, be honest with God, and to allow Him to work in our lives, and to simply exist in a place where we are validated. Unfortunately, that involves relinquishing control of that. That means that we're no longer doing things to make ourselves feel good. Instead, ideally, we're just feeling good. And when bad things happen, then we're going back to God and leaning on Him in order to receive the reassurance that we need to continue forward, instead of self-soothing, which is very much so what a lot of us do. See, the thing of it is that a lot of people want to do the work because they want to control when it gets done, they want to control how it gets done, they want to control a lot of things. And when it comes to Christ's work in this world, and what I mean by that are things like spreading the gospel, the lessons that we teach, the messages that we share to others, the words that we give, healings, those kinds of things, those are all on His time. A pastor sitting up in front of a congregation ideally should be going to God first, receiving His message from God, then sharing that message to the congregation, because that message is supposed to be from God, not from the pastor. Not a lot of pastors do that. Church decisions a lot of the times are made by pastors, by elders in the church, things like that. There's a lot of government involvement as well, which is crap. The truth of the matter is that we try to control things more than we should. And in that, we end up falling into that kind of category of playing the Martha role, because we want things to happen on our time and in our way. It's not how God operates. It never has been. One of the big problems with Christ was that the Jews expected Him to be a war leader who would lead them out of the control of Rome and back to being a free Jewish state once more. God sent His Son, and He came peacefully. He came, and He showed us what love looked like. He gave us an example to follow, and He served, and He worked, and He was a servant the whole time. He was a warrior in the sense that He gave us the tools, the power, and the authority to overcome the true enemy of God in Satan and the spirits who work for him, or with him, rather, even. He gave us the power to overcome darkness, because the reality was that the Jews didn't understand at the time was that the physical realm was not the grand enemy that they believed it was. That was their enemy, not God's. And see, the grand problem here is that, once again, we find ourselves in a place where we're struggling with our expectation versus the reality of what God wants. And the hardest thing in this whole Martha complex thing is being willing to let God move and do His thing. So it is simply this: we're called to serve, we're called to follow, we're called to soak in God's presence and to live as His children, validated by Jesus' blood. Nothing else.